Welcome to Pack Notes, a backpacking podcast hosted by me, Becky, a non-backpacker. At least for now. If you haven't listened to episode 1, basically the gist of this podcast is that I'm wanting to get into backpacking, so I'm doing a ton of research, and I'm sharing that research with you in the off chance that you're also looking to start backpacking. And I'm hoping to give you the information in just like Spark Notes type fashion, hence pack notes. Just basic information that you can kind of pick and choose the information you want to take with you, but you don't have to necessarily go digging through it in massive amounts of interviews and or very specific episodes of things like what is down and how does it work. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the basic things you need to know and consider before you start backpacking. Just as a note and a reminder, I am not experienced. I just said I'm not a backpacker. So this is all the information that I found and gathered over the last about a year or so that I'm choosing to share with you. It may not be the most accurate. So definitely double check, what I say, and do your own research. And if you are a backpacker, please contact me. Email me at packnotespod@gmail.com. If you need to correct anything, if you want to give me any sort of advice, information, etc., I would love it. But let's get into it. So the first thing you need to consider before you start planning your backpacking trip is to know exactly where you're going to hike or backpack, how long you're going to backpack for, what season you're backpacking during or seasons, the weather you may experience along your trip, the type of water availability you may encounter, and then lastly, perhaps your group size. For example, if you're going to travel and backpack with a partner and you guys are going to stick together the whole time, maybe you can split some of that gear. Another example is the desert. First off, you might think it's hot. You are correct. So you want lighter layers, but you also need to consider sun protection. So a tank top may not cut it. You may end up burning. So you may want to have some sort of sun hoodie. You may want to bring sunscreen, a wide brimmed hat to protect your face and your neck and your ears. But you may also want to bring a puffy jacket because it can get cold at night. Also in the desert, less access to water, and thus you may want to bring extra water containers to hold more water as you hike in case the distance between water caches and water sources is a little bit longer than a regular trail. All right, the next thing to consider is, do you need camping reservations anywhere? While traveling through the national parks, you may be required to camp at a campsite. Thus, you'll need a reservation. Or do you need a permit anywhere? Do you need a backcountry permit in a national park to be able to be back there in case you come across a ranger and a ranger finds you? Or do you need a permit to be on the trail at all, such as the John Muir Trail, which is in California, 211 miles long from Yosemite Valley to Mount Whitney? You do need a permit to hike, and the permit is only good for certain dates, and you usually only get a permit by lottery. So definitely do your research when you figure out what trail you want to travel on. Other types of regulations that you need to consider are there fire bans. A lot of backpackers end up using camp stoves because it's just a little bit more efficient, a little bit more reliable, and honestly, there may be fire bans in a lot of places where you can't just build a fire to heat up your soup, you know? There are other regulations, such as if you're going to be in the Grand Canyon, they require you to pack out your human waste. So definitely look into that before you or while you're planning your backpacking trip. Next, what wildlife are you going to encounter? In other words, bears. Will there be bears? Are you going to need a bear bag or a bear can? What other hazards do you need to consider, such as avalanches, wildfires, and then again, repeating with the desert stuff, access to water? And then how will you resupply along your route if you're taking a long enough trip where you are going to need to resupply? Are you going to need to go into towns? Are you going to need to hitchhike into those towns? Are you going to resupply at the grocery store or a gas station? Or are you going to try to stop at a post office where you're going to send yourself a resupply box? And exactly where is that going to happen along your trail? So all of these things are things that you're going to want to consider when you start planning your backpacking trips. So next, we're just going to get into gear. First up is navigation. How are you going to make sure you don't get lost? Your first thought might be your phone, which is totally fine and totally valid. You're just going to need to make sure that you bring plenty of battery so that you can always access those navigation apps when you need them. And I'm not experienced, but also consider the reception aspect of it. Are you still going to be able to access those apps if the reception isn't great? I don't know how that works. I don't know if GPS is different than reception on a phone. Not sure. But you definitely want to consider bringing battery. The next one is obviously like a separate GPS system, such as a Garmin, and making sure that stays charged and you know how to use it. And then last but not least is obviously a map and compass as like a backup resort. But to be able to use it, you're going to kind of need those topography skills. So you're going to want to look into that and or freshen up on that before you go on your trip, just in case. Next, let's talk about a shelter. So another big thing to consider is your shelter. What kind of shelter are you going to want to bring? The most common is obviously a tent. So when you're looking for a tent, you want to make sure it's lightweight and compact. That's basically it. And then once you get your tent, if it doesn't have a very sturdy bottom, like floor to it, you may want to also consider bringing what I would call like a footprint, something to put under your tent just in case it's a little rocky or there's a bunch of sticks or something. You want to protect the bottom of your tent so that your tent stays, well, basically like dry and keeps the elements and the bugs out. So having a footprint, like a little tarp, look into if your tent may need that. I know sometimes tents automatically have like a tarp-like bottom, which may save you a little bit of space and weight by not having to bring an extra tarp, but some may not. So then you may want to bring a tarp. The next thing to consider for a shelter is just a tarp. And just having a tarp somehow tented over you. And at the very least, what it's going to do is it's going to keep you a little bit dry in case it rains. Another option is camping in a hammock. But when you bring a hammock, which sounds super fun, are there going to be trees close enough or far enough for you to be able to set up your hammock and sleep in it? There is what I believe is called a bivvy, which is almost like, I call it like a very mini tent. It's basically a shell. From what I understand, a shelf like for your sleeping bag. So like all you can fit in there is your sleeping bag. And then near the head of your sleeping bag, the bivvy opens up a little bit so that it's not as claustrophobic. And it just basically is the size of you in your sleeping bag and still will protect you against the elements and the bugs and everything like that. But that'll be very, very lightweight, very, very small and compact. And then lastly, would you bring a shelter at all? Do you think the weather's going to be nice enough that maybe you can cowboy camp the entire time, which is literally just in your sleep system out under the stars? So you're going to want to figure out what kind of shelter, if any, you're going to want to bring. Next, we're going to talk about the sleep system, which is basically your sleeping bag and whatever you're sleeping on, air mattress, sleeping pad. First off, weather is going to dictate a little bit kind of what kind of sleeping bag you're going to bring. You're going to want to make sure that the sleeping bag rates and the air mattress to some extent. The sleeping bag will rate low enough for the temperatures you're going to experience, and your mats or air pads, sleeping whatever you're sleeping on, they can also be rated so that it helps to insulate you at certain temperatures. I will just mention that mummy bags for sleeping bags are very popular for backpackers because at the end of the day, it's going to be less material and thus less weight and space taken up in your pack. But quilts are actually becoming more popular. Backpacking quilts. They are more expensive, but a lot of people like them because they end up being even less material and thus even more lightweight and more compact, but work just as well as a regular sleeping bag. They are going to cost you though. Okay, again, water, potable water on trail. Are you going to be able to filter it? And will there be water caches? Things to look into. So how are you going to carry the water? How are you going to filter the water? And then also, if you do have a filter, that can clog or break. So what do you have a backup system for filtering your water? Basically, if you're going to be filtering your water, you're going to need some sort of container that's going to be only for dirty water, whether that's like a bag or another water bottle. And then you're going to need containers for clean water. And please do not mix them up. If you're curious as what a backup to a, let's say, a physical water filter is, there are chemical water filters that come in like just these little tabs that you put in the water and you let it sit for X amount of minutes and it'll chemically treat the water so that it is potable and kills a lot of the harmful organisms in it, bacteria, etc. All right, food. We'll just briefly talk about food. So food itself, you want to think about bringing a lot of things that may be dehydrated so that it weighs a little bit less and ends up being a little bit smaller, so more compact. But also, like, how are you going to eat it? How are you going to heat it up if you are going to heat it up? If you want to bring nothing but protein bars the entire time, you're going on a short trip, it's all protein bars, that's just great. But if you are going to go on a longer one and you do want to like have warmer food, you're going to want to bring maybe a backpacking stove, a pot, a little utensil to eat it with, things like that. So you're going to want to look into all of that. As well as, since we're on the topic of food, we're going to bring up bears again. You're going to want to have a bear bag that you can put all of your food into and hang it up on a tree. And you're going to want to look at how high it needs to be, on what type of tree, how far away it needs to be from the main part of the tree, etc. So you're going to want to look into that. Or is it going to be a bear can, which is going to be this large canister that either you're going to try to fit into your pack or you're going to need to strap on the outside of your pack. And that is something that you're going to put all of your food and anything that smells fun in, and then you're going to want to have it like about a quarter mile away from where you end up camping. So you're going to want to look into that. And lastly, you're going to want to make sure you have at least 1 or 2 bags for the trash that your food is going to create. Also, when you have like leftover food, you're going to want to make sure that goes into, and you don't want to carry that in a garbage bag in your pack. Make sure you put the leftover food in your cat hole. And we'll talk about cat holes in a little bit. Okay, next up for gear is trekking poles. Do you absolutely need them? Maybe not, but these are definitely something that I would highly consider from a lot of the people I hear being interviewed and the research that I've done. Trekking poles aren't just for relieving a little bit of weight. It's really good for stability. It is really good for your arms and the circulation in your arms. It's good for stability when scrambling. It's good for stability when crossing rivers, as well as it's good for post holing, where maybe if you're crossing a river, you can post hole in front of you to see what the depth is. Same within snowy areas, checking to see if you're going to be falling into a 5-foot snow hole in the middle of the trail. So definitely so many different benefits of trekking poles. But again, you're just going to want to make sure that they're lightweight and that they're comfortable for your hands. You're just going to want to make sure that your arm is at a 90-degree angle, about bent at the elbow, when you're holding onto it. And the last thing I'll mention about trekking poles for new backpackers to consider is if you're going to travel on a plane with them, TSA, I believe, is going to require you to keep the tip covers on them. So make sure you don't accidentally toss those once you get them. I'm definitely somebody that'd be like, I don't need that, and then toss it. But definitely something to consider is if you need to travel on a plane, make sure you have those tip covers. All right, let's briefly talk about clothes. So, like I said, we're going to talk about warmer layers first. Like I mentioned with the desert, you're going to want lighter layers that are going to protect you from the sun and keep you cool, as well as you may still want a puffy. I mentioned sun hoodies. You can look up sun hoodies, or else long sleeve fishing shirts are pretty similar. They're going to keep the sun off of you, and they're also going to keep you cool. I have a sun hoodie somewhere, and it actually feels cool to the touch, which is really cool. Also, a lot of people, may wear shorts in warmer weather, which makes sense, but also consider other things like bushwhacking or mosquitoes, where you may want a little bit more protection around your legs. So maybe a pair of lightweight pants to help protect you a little bit from mosquito bites or to protect your legs from all the scratches of bushwhacking. So definitely things to consider. And then yet again, with warmer weather, you're going to want some sort of hat to protect your face and head and even your neck from the sun. So maybe something like a bucket hat. Or wearing maybe a buff or a handkerchief. Who says that? Bandana. To protect like the back of your neck from the sun. We'll pop in back up to cooler cold weather. I'm just looking at my notes, so I kind of skipped and I'm hopping back up. But when you're hiking through cooler, colder weather, you have a little bit of a layering system. So you're going to have a base layer, which could be just like a regular t-shirt, tank top, long sleeve, etc. You're going to have a middle layer, which is going to be a little bit thicker. And then you're going to have an insulating layer. You're not necessarily going to have to wear the middle layer with the insulating layer, but an insulating layer is going to have something with insulating material such as down or synthetic. So like a puffy is considered an insulating layer. And then lastly, you're going to want a shell. Something that is going to be wind resistant, water resistant. I will briefly mention before I get into the shell that all of your other layers should not be cotton. There is the quote, if you've never heard of it, cotton kills outdoors. Cotton just retains moisture, and what moisture is going to do is it's going to pull heat away from your body and it's going to keep you cold. So for your base middle insulating layer, you want to make sure you're either wearing other natural fibers such as wool, fleece, or synthetic, not cotton. Going back to the shell, I said water resistant and wind resistant, not waterproof. Just because waterproof is definitely going to keep the water out, but it's also going to keep heat in, which you may think, well, it's cold, you want the heat in, but not exactly. If you keep heat in, it's going to be harder for your body to regulate itself with temperature, so it's going to possibly overheat, which will cause you to sweat and thus make you wet, so that when your body cools down, it's going to then continue to pull the heat away from your body. And you're going to end up just like cotton, where you could risk the chance of developing hypothermia. So you want to try to focus more on water resistant, not waterproof. You don't want to trap that heat. While you're backpacking, you may want your set of clothes, the base layer, the insulating layer, the middle layer, etc. That's what you're hiking in. And then you may want a clean set to sleep in. Just in case it gets just in case it gets wet, you want to make sure you have a dry set of clothes. Generally, people like to have thermals when they're camping in cooler temperatures. So a clean set of thermals. And again, that's just going to make sure that you have something dry to wear so that when you start sleeping and your body shuts down, again, you don't have to worry about sweating and pulling the heat away from your body and thus developing hypothermia. And of course, you're going to want to make sure that you have some way to protect your head from heat escaping. So you're going to want to make sure you bring something like a beanie or a winter hat. And then lastly, to consider gloves, for comfort, if anything. All right, we're going to skip over real quick to rain gear. So you're going to have, obviously, an option is rain jacket, right? I do have like not a collapsible, but like a very, I've had it forever. I think it's like Sierra Designs, and it's a really cool hiking rain jacket that just bunches up very, very small, fits in its own little like carrying thing, and I can just toss that in my backpack. But they also make rain pants or rain skirts, so that when you are traveling in, like, let's say you're expecting rain for the next few days, I know that it would help my sanity to just remain dry overall if I had maybe a dry torso, but then my legs are constantly wet, that, just for comfort and your sanity, they do make rain pants and rain skirts something to consider, and they can end up being relatively lightweight. And then other things I will mention again is like a buff is really cool. So it's kind of like a loop of fabric, and it's not necessarily that thick, but if you have it, you can either have it around your neck so that it protects your neck either from the wind, from the cold, or from the sun. But then you can also usually wrap it around your head to keep your hair out of your face, to have extra insulation on your head. You can turn it into a balaclava to protect like the lower part of your face as well as your head. So it's very versatile and a really cool piece that I wanted to mention in clothing gear for people to look into and consider. All right. So we talked about clothes. Now we need to talk about shoes, right? Like one of the most important things that you need to consider on a backpacking trip, you're going to be on your feet many hours a day, traveling many, many miles. So there's the boot versus trail runners, I guess, discussion, right? At the end of the day, hike your own hike, but I will give you some pros and cons for each. So when you have your typical hiking boots, the first thing I'll mention is they are heavier. And the more weight you have on your feet, it does kind of inch its way up the chain and it will affect your back. So it's something to consider. However, there are so many pros to having hiking boots. They're sturdier. They end up being like thicker. So they're going to be sturdier. They're going to last longer. Theoretically, they can generally provide more traction on the soles of the shoes. If you have high top hiking boots, they can supply more ankle support. You can get them as water resistant or waterproof if you think you're going to be traveling through a lot of wetter weather or environments. However, because of them being like sturdier and thicker and like even possibly be water resistant or waterproof, that just means that if you do get water in them, or they do get wet, it will take them quite a bit longer to dry out. So when you're doing a river crossing, chances are you're probably going to be crossing above your ankle, above the height of your shoe. So even if it's water resist or waterproof, that doesn't prevent necessarily the water seeping in from the top. So if you do end up getting wet boots, it's going to take longer for them to dry out. Now, trail runners. If you don't know what trail runners are, they're basically sneakers with a little bit more traction than regular sneakers, so that theoretically they're more designed to be on a hiking trail. So they're called trail runners. There are quite a few pros for them. Well, the two pros are basically the opposite of the cons for the boots, is that they end up being lighter. So they're going to be better for your joints over time. It's not as much pressure on them, not as much weight on all of your joints in your back. So they are lighter. They're probably going to end up being more comfortable that way then. And then they dry out faster. They're lighter, they're airy, they're not as sturdy, so that if they do get wet, chances are they're going to be dry by the end of the day, if not the next day. Again, if it's not raining the entire time. So they dry out pretty quick. However, the cons are because they're probably not going to be water resistant or waterproof. So if you're wanting to retain as dry feet as possible, they're probably not going to stay that dry. And then with that being said, they may not be the best option for rainy, snowy weather. Those are really the only cons. I would say like they're not going to provide ankle support, but there are also boots that won't provide ankle support. And I guess you could say that they have less traction. But when you're concerned about things like wet logs that are really, really slick, or wet stones that you're crossing, river crossings, or even ice in snowy weather, I don't think the traction between the trail runners or the boots is really going to make that much of a difference. So those are some pros and cons of each. You can decide what you want. I will just say that if I'm doing a short hike, basically anything under just a couple weeks, I will probably end up wearing boots. But if I were to ever plan a thru hike, I think I will end up going with trail runners, purely because over the 5 or 6 months it's going to take me to do a thru hike of one of the large trails, that's going to save a lot of weight off my back over time. And I think I'm just going to have a more comfortable trip. Other things to consider for your feet are primarily if you're going to be in snowy weather. Are you going to want to possibly consider snowshoes or crampons or micro spikes? Are you going to have any snowy, icy conditions along your path? So something to consider to either bring or to have at a resupply spot before you reach that type of environment. All right, moving right along, we're going to talk about bathroom and hygiene real quick. Okay, poop kit, right? We are not supposed to poop. Well, don't poop right on the trail. That's rude as hell. But we're not supposed to poop at the surface. We are supposed to dig a cat hole 6 inches deep into some sort of sub layer of dirt that we're going to be able to poop into, or put the poop or whatever into, and then bury it. And that's going to really help the human waste decompose. So that's what you're supposed to do. So for your poop kit, you're going to want to make sure you have a trowel. And I wish I had one within reach. You know what? This is a podcast, not a video. You're not even going to be able to see it if you're just listening. So let's not worry about that. So you're going to want a trowel or a little shovel. They make really lightweight ones so that every time you need to go, you're going to be able to dig yourself a little cat hole. And then what kind of cleaning system are you going to do? Some people will bring toilet paper, clean themselves after they go number 2, and then just pack out the toilet paper. I'm not condoning this. I mean, if you find biodegradable toilet paper, you should be able to bury it with your poop in the cat hole. However, I love me some Mother Nature, and I try to be as environmentally conscious as possible. You may want to look into regular toilet paper. I don't think regular toilet paper is necessarily going to be the greatest for the environment to bury, but maybe look into that. If that's an option, definitely consider it. That's something that I haven't looked too into just yet. Maybe we can cover that on a future episode. But how are you going to clean yourself? Tissue. What are you going to do with that tissue? There's another option that I'm actually personally considering. I'm just going to admit, a bidet. If you're wondering what the hell a bidet looks like on trail, it's basically a squeeze bottle, so a soft plastic bottle with this sort of like extension at the cap that bends at like a 45-degree angle with this nozzle on the end. So you're going to fill it with clean water, turn it upside down, and that nozzle is going to, when the bottle's upside down, the nozzle is going to aim up at a 45-degree angle. And you're going to be able to squeeze the water, which will shoot it through the nozzle and create a bidet. So then you're going to be able to clean your little hiney on the trail over your cat hole. And then all you have to worry about is maybe air drying your bum a little bit, and you're going to be clean. You're going to be able to go on your way, but you don't have to pack anything out. You just have to have an extra, few ounces of clean water. And then lastly, how are you going to maintain cleanliness and hygiene? You'll definitely want to make sure you're bringing hand sanitizer. Okay, if you're packing anything out, for example, if you have to pack out human waste on the Grand Canyon, things like that, you're going to want to make sure that you have a very protective container to pack it out. If you're not too worried about smell, then you just want to make sure it's not going to break and get all over your other stuff. They do have in existence what's called a WAG bag, and that is waste alleviation and gelling. And gelling is a powder that turns liquids into gel and helps control odors. I've actually used one. It's very, very interesting. It's a little bit different than cat litter. It sounds like cat litter, but it's like if cat litter turned it into a gel rather than a clump. So it's very interesting. I've used one before, and that was cool. However, I feel like the WAG bag itself was kind of heavy. If you're thinking about weight related to backpacking, the WAG bags are kind of heavy. But if that's your option for whatever type of packing you're doing, you can look into it. Oral hygiene. If you're going to brush your teeth on the trail, you need to spit into the cat hole. Technically, that's what you're supposed to do. But again, it's going to help your toothpaste break down. Some people will take a regular toothbrush and cut off like the tail and just have the head or something, or half a toothbrush. I personally like the idea of a travel toothbrush because I'm going to be able to like close it and protect it. So I think that would be just fine. I mean, I haven't exactly weighed the options of a cut off toothbrush with a cap versus a true travel toothbrush. But then you also can consider either a small tube of toothpaste or a regular, depending on the length of your trip, or there's toothpaste tablets. And again, you're going to have to weigh the options as to what weighs less, what packs down, etc. But those are some options. And again, do you want to bring floss? There are options for that. Just going to let you know, I don't know if anybody really brings mouthwash. So if you're through hiking, people aren't showering. So I don't know how many people are going to worry about their oral hygiene that much over just a few months. Okay, personal odor. So I just said people aren't showering. There are a lot of people don't even bring deodorant on backpacking trips. They're like, I'm just gonna get smelly and stinky, and people are gonna have to deal with it. It's very, very common. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's also nothing wrong with if you don't necessarily want to do that. So I have some ideas about personal odor. Obviously, you can bring deodorant, but there are castile soaps and biodegradable soaps. Both can be, I think both are biodegradable and better for the environment. Both can be used all around for everything from personal hygiene to even laundry and dishes. So that's something to consider, is that if you're going to bring soap for one thing, it could probably be used for other things. Also, with the soaps, you're going to want to bury it in your cat hole. So if you're going to clean yourself, you're going to want to make sure you're washing and rinsing off into a cat hole, which sounds silly. Are you going to like step into a cat hole and then like shower in it? Maybe. But that is the recommendation. That's technically what they want you to do. Do not bathe with your soap in a river, in a pond, in an open body of water. Do not just grab your soap and bathe and assume it's going to get diluted enough out. It's not. It is going to pollute the water. Please don't. I would much rather you do it like, I think you're supposed to be like, 200 feet from a water source to dig your cat hole. Just go find that 200 feet and do whatever, but just please don't do it in a water source. And then of course, hand sanitizer. Now I'm just going to put out there that I've put hand sanitizer under my armpits because it kills bacteria, and bacteria is pretty much what causes it to smell. It helped a little bit. Wasn't great, but it helped a little bit. So something to consider if you're feeling like you're extra smelly and you want to walk into town and you're a little self-conscious, but all you brought was hand sanitizer. It's definitely something to consider. Sun protection. I already talked about it. I think with the hot weather and stuff, or traveling through the desert, sunscreen, especially if you're prone to burning and things. Again, we still want to protect our bodies against, the harmful rays and protect from things like skin cancer and stuff like that. So definitely please consider bringing it, even if it's a small tube. But then also consider lighter weight fabrics that will cover your entire body, like a sun hoodie. Please protect your skin. Bug repellent. There are a lot of trails that are going to have a lot of bugs. It's definitely probably going to be worth it to bring some sort of bug repellent. Now, I'm just going to talk briefly about the different types. So, permethrin. Permethrin-treated fabrics will help repel insects such as ticks and mosquitoes, so you don't have to rely so much on bug spray. However, permethrin is harmful to cats. If you are going to treat your fabrics, you can treat your backpack, your tent, your clothes, your shoes, you can treat that. If you're going to, make sure you do not bring it back inside where cats are located. It is very, very harmful and toxic to them. I would hate for anything to happen with your animals if you either treat it with permethrin yourself or have it sent out to be treated, and then you bring it back into your house and they're exposed to that chemical. I don't know what type of exposure is necessarily dangerous. Like, I don't know if it just having it in the house and it gets into the air, or if it's as simple as like just coming in contact with it. So then maybe you can bring it inside, but just make sure that the cat doesn't come in contact. But I just wanted to throw that out there. I do have a cat, and I want to make sure if I get anything treated with permethrin, I probably won't bring it back into the house. I believe I listened to something recently where DEET isn't as nasty as a lot of people think it is for us, for our bodies, but it can, I think, eat plastic, and it can damage your gear. But I was told it's supposed to be okay for us, which sounds silly. If it can eat plastic, how is it okay for us? But that's something to consider. So maybe you bring it and you want to make sure that you just keep it away from your gear when you apply it. Picaridin. This is a direct application topical for your skin. It is a safer alternative to DEET, as in it's safer. They do consider DEET not that safe for kids and pregnant women. So again, I don't know how I heard somebody say that it's not that terrible for adults if they still kind of want to make sure you're protecting children and pregnant women. But it works, I was told, very, very well. similar to DEET, but it's a safer product. So it's picaridin, Picaridin. There are other options that aren't chemical, such as bug nets or mesh. I did get like a head net because I was like, oh, y'all, I don't like bugs that much. So I will definitely, if I think there's going to be a lot of bugs along the trail, I'm going to bring a bug net. And then another thing to note is that rain gear can be pretty good at protecting from bugs. So if you're not going to like overheat too much wearing your rain jacket while you're hiking, or rain pants or something, it may help protect you from bugs. So the next thing we're going to talk about is emergency prep. First thing is obviously a small first aid kit. If you talk, I've heard lots of interviews with backpackers, and basically it just kind of comes down to somebody's first aid kit is Tylenol and Leukotape. I don't care. You hike your own hike, right? Bring Band-Aids, bring, a topical antibiotic ointment, whatever you want. Make it as big or as little as you want. I'm not going to judge, but maybe bring something just in case. Other things to consider, like an emergency blanket, in case you do believe you could fall into that risky business of hypothermia. Lightweight, pretty small. Pack it out. Prepping for an emergency. If you notice your phone getting very, very low, obviously you're going to want to make sure you're altering how you're utilizing your battery life so that in an emergency you're going to be able to call out. If you're worried about, again, reception with phones and emergencies, they do make satellite messengers. And they're small, and a lot of people like to keep them right here. And just look into them. I can't explain them very well right now. I hope to cover them in a future episode, but they're really small, and sometimes like all you're going to be able to do is send out an SOS signal that will kind of relay to local emergency respond teams and get you help. Some you might be able to actually just like message directly, but limitedly to like texting. You might be able to message. I think I heard when I was looking into it. So look into satellite messengers. And then this is my personal opinion that I don't hear too often, but when you're planning your trips, make sure you're telling somebody. I'm about to take a trip over to the Smoky Mountains in like about a week, and I'm going to make sure I have Life 360 on so everyone knows where I am because I'm going by myself. Make sure you have somebody that knows your plan, knows where you're going, where you're expected to be along the way, how long you expect to be out there, etc., 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 so that if you end up not getting at that last location when you're supposed to, it'll be a lot easier to hopefully try to find you if you get lost. But on the other hand, I would say try not to post your location, especially women, to an extent where maybe somebody you don't want finding you can find you. That is just a roundabout way of saying, if you're going to post your experience, maybe make sure that it's delayed enough that it's going to be hard for somebody to guess where you might be next. Does that make sense? Just be careful when you're posting content, especially as a woman. All right, other things to consider packing for gear: a knife, a very small knife that's going to help you tremendously in various ways. A lighter. If you're bringing a backpacking stove and it doesn't have an ignition, I don't know what you want to call it. A lighter as a backup or as an emergency for starting fires, things like that. A small patch kit is something to consider for either your puffy jacket, your tent, your backpack, etc. Bandana as a backup, whether that can be a snot rag, can be a buff, can be like a way to filter water, physically filter water. Bandana is great, and variety of uses. And then I don't hear a lot of people talking about this. So this is more like, this would probably be in a hygiene kit, but like nail clippers. Especially if you're going on a long hike. I don't necessarily mean your fingernails, although that's great because when they get too long, they start getting snagged on stuff, and like, it's not great having long nails when you're working with your hands. But more like toenails. If they get too long and they start pressing up against the like foot of or the toe of your shoe, that's how you can like lose toenails. They'll grow back, but it sounds painful. Sounds not so fun, especially out in the middle of nowhere. So you might want to bring a pair of nail clippers and keep up on the length of your toenails. Okay, the last piece of gear we're going to talk about is the backpack. So, Before you decide necessarily what kind of backpack or the size of backpack you want, you may want to figure out all the gear you're going to need to put into it. Backpacks are generally labeled by size, and they're sized by liters. So you might have a 35-liter pack, a 45-liter pack, 55, 65, etc. I think they go by like 5s or 10s or something. And you're going to want to make sure that the backpack is the correct size for you. What I mean by that is the length of your spine will tell you the size of your backpack. So you want to make sure you have the size that's right for you. How do you measure your spine? You're basically going to measure from the top of your iliac crest. So if you start feeling around your waist for like the top of your like hip bones, your iliac crests, you're going to find along your back. If you kind of like bring it around to your back, you're going to find like that point on your spine, and you're going to feel for C7, which is basically the bump at the back of your neck, like the base of your neck and the top of your shoulders. That's C7. So you're going to measure that distance, and that's going to give you the size of your backpack. And you're going to want to make sure your back, I'm not even looking at the camera. Sorry, YouTube. I'm looking at a butterfly on my phone case. Once you know the length of your spine, that's going to determine your size, and you want to make sure that your backpack fits your back. Again, you're going to want a pretty lightweight if you can handle it. I have a Marmot bag that I got off of eBay, and it's got a bunch of bells and whistles, but itself, how much does it weigh? Let me see if I can look that up. I forgot. Itself weighs about 4 pounds and 7 ounces, just the backpack itself. And a lot of that is probably just all the bells and whistles, the extra straps and the extra bags and the extra this and the extra that I probably don't even need. I'll use it until I probably can't stand it anymore. But as I'm getting into it, I'm not too worried about the size of that. But again, hike your own hike, doesn't matter. But you want to make sure your backpack is also a little bit lightweight, because that's going to put less weight on your shoulders and weight on your back and your hips and everything like that. And it's going to make your hiking trip a little bit more enjoyable, theoretically, unless you like pain and torture. The last note on backpacks is that they have several different kinds. First, I'll talk about frameless packs. That's just basically your basic school bag. No structure. Again, hike your own hike. I don't care. If you want to use that, that's fine. People have done it. Totally doable. But framed backpacks may be a little bit more comfortable. The frame sounds like it could be really heavy. It's usually really not. It's like aluminum. It's really, really, really lightweight. But there are internal frames and there are external frames. So my Marmot that I mentioned before, it's an Eiger 45-liter pack. It's an internal frame, which means that like it's very stiff and you can tell, but you don't see the frame. And then usually they have like waist straps that allow you to tighten it so that the pack basically sits on your hips rather than on your shoulders. So that's where like a frame kind of comes into play. That's going to be very, very beneficial for you. And then they do have external framed backpacks, where it's basically the frame is what you're holding onto. It's like a frame with straps and a waistband or whatever, waist belt, and that sets on you. And then you kind of connect or set the backpack onto the external frame. So to summarize backpack, just make sure it's a little bit lightweight. If you want, pick a frame and make sure it fits your spine. All right, that's the basic information to look into when you're trying to plan a backpacking trip. Once again, I'm not a professional. I don't have a lot of experience. This is just stuff that I've looked into, that I've done research on, and this is what I found. If you have better advice, please email me at packnotespod@gmail.com and give me all the advice, all of the information that you're willing to share with me. If I said anything that is wrong, please correct me, and I will make sure that I correct myself in one of the future episodes, because I want to make sure I'm sharing the correct information. If you have any other advice you would love to give me, and you would love to give my listeners, please share it with me and I'll share it on the podcast. If you are a new backpacker or someone trying to get into backpacking and you have your own questions that you would love me to cover in future episodes, please feel free to email me that as well. Again, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me where you find your average podcast, and we'll see if I create an Instagram or a TikTok in the future. Anyways, and leave me a review if you found any benefit, preferably 5 stars. That'll also help me get out there, and more people like you or me who want to get into backpacking or just want to listen to more backpacking style podcasts can find me. So leave me a good review. That would be great. If you leave me a good review, maybe I'll read it on here. That's kind of what a lot of podcasters do. If you have any experience, if you want to tell me a story that you think would be very fun to read on the podcast, oh, I'll read it. Tell me your stories. But basically, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found one smidge of useful information in this episode, and I hope to catch you in the next one. All right, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.